The tier 2 is where I think, and we've been sort of starting to recommend that, you want to trade down in this group because there's sort of a flat group, isn't there? Like there's a lot of good players here in this wide receiver group. Like you just mentioned, 3 seniors that, Roman Wilson, Javon Walker, these guys weren't even John Baker. I'm sorry, Javon Walker. Isn't that a cool
blast from the past?
Slip? That's cool. Look at that. That was fun. There's a lot of guys, man. I keep looking. I keep finding new wide receivers that I like. What the hell, man? Who do you have a wide receiver for in this class right now? And is it Ladd McConkey?
So in my rough draft, and I will say this is rough, but I do have my rough draft rankings. For me, it's Brian Thomas is for Brian Thomas. I watched a ton of LSU this year because they were the funnest team to watch because they have one of the funnest offenses you'll ever watch in college football and a travesty of a defense, just a train wreck. Like week in and week out, you're like, how is it possible for them to have the athletes they do on defense and be this bad? Like, I mean, they had Harold Perkins, for instance, the guy we're going to be talking about next class, and they had some other really good players on defense, but it was just so bad. And so they would be in all these just wild shootouts.
Yes.
You talk about Neighbors' game, and he's so fun. And Thomas has a different kind of a game. He's 6'4", 200, and more of the downfield speed kind of guy. The utility is not quite as dynamic with Neighbors, where Neighbors, you can do everything, and then he's doing all this different stuff. But Thomas is going to be a really, really good number 2 guy in the NFL, I think.
Yeah.
A really high end. You might consider him a low end 1, depending on the constitution of your wide receiver core. But for me, ideally, he would be an awesome field stretching number 2 guy. I really like his ball skills.
I have a couple questions. First, I'm going to start with your Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas, and AD Mitchell, right?
Yeah.
So these 3 guys are like this Alpha X outside prototype, but they're not Marvin Harrison Jr. You know what I mean? So then you say, okay, well, T. Higgins was that kind of player, right? We had questions about T. Higgins. Michael Pittman was a bit that kind of player.
Mm-hmm.
But so wasn't N'Keal Harry and Terrace Marshall, right? So there have been a lot of misses on the outside, right? These outside big X guys that, even sometimes when they hit, like even George Pickens, it's like, it's not like you just aren't getting, 150 targets all the time. Not all of them can be DeAndre Hopkins out there. And so, their utility and how they win and whether or not they can command targets from the X is very difficult. You really have to be a Michael Pittman style alpha. Even T. Higgins, for my money, I mean, he's kind of expensive, George Pickens. He's never had more than 110 targets in a season. He's played like 4 years. I know some of them have been cut short by injury, but he's not been. I know he plays next to Jamar Chase. Yes. But still, right? So for me, it's like this prototype has been a scary prototype to target in rookie drafts. And it's crazy to say that because historically it's been the only prototype, dating back to the, Michael Irvins and stuff, right? So, the game has changed. I guess the question is, are you getting any of those vibes? Like even DJ Chark vibes for like Brian Thomas. Do you know what I'm saying? Like a guy that's like, yeah, he has some utility in the NFL, but not for your fantasy team. And I know that's hard to parse sometimes, but what are your thoughts about these 3 big guys?
Yeah, for sure. And that's well set up, Jax. I mean, that's one of the reasons why with a guy like Coleman, that's where some of that pessimism comes in, because those guys that you're mentioning where it didn't hit, where they fell into that phylum, you start to be like, oh, that kind of reminds me of what I'm seeing with Keon Coleman. You know what I mean? But then you can just as easily on the other side of it. I mean, I think a part of the reason why Brian Thomas is growing on me all year, you start talking yourself into some of the guys that you liked on the other side of that spectrum. And you're like, he reminds me of those guys. So some of it could be context. I mean, just admittedly, I'll just toss this out is Brian Thomas, he was playing, well, so was Neighbors, but like just in terms of these guys, was playing with one of the better quarterbacks that we'd had in college football for the last decade. The season that Jaden Daniels just had was just an absolute assassin. And Jaden Daniels, what is he best at? As far as a thrower, it's downfield stuff. So Brian Thomas is in a very advantageous situation this year for what his specific game is. Whereas Keon Coleman, at the end of the season, Florida State had as bad a quarterback play as you'll ever see in the Power Five after Jordan Travis got injured. That's for the Florida State fans that were bitching that the Seminoles got omitted from the playoffs. It's like, bitch at your head coach that didn't bring in a competent backup quarterback. I had seen the Tate Rodemaker kid play because the season before Jordan Travis got hurt. That kid sucks. And I'm sorry if Tate Rodemaker and his family are watching the show. But
I'm sure they are.
They might be. And then, that kid gets injured. And then they had a freshman, this Brock Glenn kid, who was even worse. Maybe he'll be good someday. But, he was just, was at the high school prom a couple months before that, whatever. Right. So that was at the end of the year. And before that, you had Jordan Travis, like, you take your hat off to him because earlier in his career, he was at Louisville and he stunk and he was a 3-star recruit. And he got pretty good, just developing and stuff like that. And he's a dual threat guy. He's not a good passer. He's very inaccurate. Like so I'll just say from the stats this year, Keon Coleman had 87 targets. PFF charted 55 of them as catchable. Just sort of saying the environment. So he had 32 passes thrown at him, which were not in the vicinity of Keon Coleman. It was just,
yes, that's right.
He was just the closest guy to it or whatever. Yeah, so right. he was playing with all these accuracy averse guys, and this is supposed to be Keon Coleman, his big NFL audition. And we thought it would be, right? Like he was in Michigan State all the way up until the spring. This past spring, we thought he was going to play at Michigan State, and then he just decided, like, no, I don't want to be here anymore. Mel Tucker is going to get fired in the fall, probably. I'm going to go down and try to win a championship at Florida State. So that's what he ended up doing, and the offensive environment just wasn't as conducive for him as we thought it might be. But that being said, if I'm going to get back to the evaluation, just parsing between Coleman and Thomas, for instance. Thomas, he's going to win downfield in the NFL. The speed plays, he knows how to stack people, and the downfield ball skills will play, if nothing else. So if nothing else, I know that he can do that number 2 field stretching thing, even if the other stuff never comes along. Keon Coleman, I have myriad concerns with him where it's like, can he even get to the bar of, like, I know for sure that if all else fails, there's a fail safe where he will at least be a starter in the NFL for a long time as a number 2. And I don't know that there is. Like, he's that extremely high variance guy. And that's where it gets really hard for me to parse. Like, he can be a lumbering mover. I don't love his routes. The ball skills come and go. And again, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt of, like, the quarterback play that he played with in college. But you see the physical ability, but it just comes and goes. There was games where he disappeared totally. It's like, is Keon here? Is he in the building? So that's sort of myself with Keon Coleman. I'm still trying to get my head around Keon Coleman, as you can tell, but like right now I'm more out on him than I'm in.
Yeah. And they had him returning punts. They clearly valued him as a playmaker. They're like, well, the punt you can actually catch. So we can start there. You got a chance to at least touch the ball. He had a pretty good true sophomore season at Michigan State. Another team not exactly known for its passing game, and he was 800 yards, 14 yards a catch. I don't know, man. It's just it's a terrifying type of player to draft, whether it's any of these 3 guys.